Attack of the 5'4" woman. That's the focus of tonight's angle.
He has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
Whoa, she was raging in that interview at the top with Bret Baier. Well, I think she probably sees what all of us see, that beating Trump is a lot harder than they thought. And they're beginning to lose ground in key places. So now they're going back to what didn't work every other time they tried it. Obsessing over Trump's language and the hyperbole of the last 24 hours, as tired as the dinosaurs spewing it.
Putin is the 20th century's Adolf Hitler. What's Putin trying to do? He's trying to play Donald Trump. So I think we are in such a dangerous position that Trump might become president again.
President again. Going back to the Russia collusion nonsense. I mean, I guess it's easier than grappling with one incontrovertible fact. Bob, Putin didn't dare invade Ukraine when Trump was president. But look, this final innings smearing of Trump is just more the same.
This feels like what you read in history are the last days of a dictatorship. To me, this would be like if there was an iPhone in the bunker in 1945. This is the kind of things you would hear, the stuff he's saying on stage in the course of this. And it's, you know, obviously it's incredibly dangerous.
Okay, they're back. Now they're in Hitler's bunker. Oh, my goodness. Trump's tough talk is dangerous to these people? Now, what about the 10 million migrants, including violent criminals, that Biden and Harris let waltz right into America? Is that incredibly dangerous? Nah. Now, when they say dangerous, let me tell you what they really mean. They mean that another Trump presidency will be dangerous to their grip on influence and power. And even casual political observers notice the obvious message coordination happening here. From the New York Times claiming that Trump is escalating threats and offering a far less democratic form of government. I mean, come on. Of course, Kamala's ever-trusty friends at Axios, they add onto the pig pile, revealing the blueprint for Kamala Harris's campaign's closing argument. In a nutshell, let me tell you what it is. Joy and love didn't do the trick. No one brought her freedom and change narrative. They weren't buying that. And now her brat summer is just a fear-mongering fall. Axios says that she's countered Trump's increasingly dark, grievance-filled rhetoric with warnings of what could happen if he's elected, a move that some former Biden aides say sounds like their own strategy. Yeah, because it's already been done before by Biden and it didn't work. Well, look, it's not the first time that she's been accused of copying others' work without attribution, is it? She even went on a tirade today trying to play to the squad and people like Rachel Maddow. You know, the woman whose party tried to put Donald Trump in jail is now claiming in lie after lie that he is the anti-democratic force to fear.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged. He sent a mob, an armed mob, to the United States Capitol, and he refused to engage in the peaceful transfer of power. He considers any American who doesn't support him to be an enemy to our country. And further, he says that as commander-in-chief, he would use our military to go after them.
Lie, 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 lie. Go peacefully to do your march to the Capitol. Wasn't that what he said? Something like it, I'm paraphrasing. Now, seriously, of course, reverting to Biden's old strategy, which is Charlottesville, January 6th, an enemies list, Hitler, Putin, the end of the Constitution. I mean, I gotta say, what else do they have? They have to go back to it. Because they sure as heck don't want to talk about the massive layoffs happening across America. And yet none of the anti-Trump smears, I think, are going to change the public views on any of this. The issue that matters most in this country is the economy. But again, Kamala's team thinks that scaring voters about Trump is the only card they have to play. Yet how can it possibly make Americans vote against their own pocketbooks, which they'll obviously be doing if they vote for her? Now, the polling is consistently terrible for Harris, saying that 59% say the economy is getting worse. More than twice as many say it's getting better. Then they say it's getting better. Only 23% say it's getting better. And among registered voters who say the economy is worsening, Trump leads Harris by a sweeping 53 points. So the spinmeisters and the messaging gurus in Kamala's camp are trying to bluff Americans. They have a bad card, and they're playing a losing hand with a losing argument made by a woman who's never won a national primary. A woman who warns about Trump's rhetoric while they casually spew the worst insults at Trump. I don't even think she really believes what she's saying. None of them do. They never really have. It's all just a talking point in the absence of a real record to run on. And that's the angle. All right, coming up, Kamala's campaign plagued by incompetence in a key swing state. We'll bring you all the details next.
Covering the Kamala campaign's been disorienting. First, she was the most unpopular VP in history. Then she's Mrs. Messiah. Her record's radical left. Then she agrees with Trump, but her values haven't changed. Okay? Her VP's wooing white dudes and Obama's scolding the brothers. She hid from CNN for 5 weeks. Then she turned down the Fox debate. Now she's playing footsie with Rogan and begging to come on Fox. Well, be careful what you wish for, because Kamala Harris just sat down with Bret Baier for a half hour, and she was roughed up so badly, Pelosi's asking Joe to get back in.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you
now,
just a number? Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. So looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Finish?
Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and they didn't bring up that bill. I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem.
This was the first time the vice president and the Democrat nominee had ever had to answer for herself. She spent more time defending herself with Brett than she has defending the actual border. Then it got personal.
Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Bret Baier is giving Kamala an opportunity to say if she were president, Laken Riley would have been alive. Kamala should have said that's something I would have done differently than Biden. I would have secured the border much earlier, but I was just the VP serving at the pleasure of the president. And if you vote for me, I promise I'll protect women like Laken Riley. At this stage of the campaign, saying, I'm sorry about the dead woman on my watch, it's all Trump's fault, it's not going to fly. Harris has never been pressed this hard on her border policies. And it continued.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss, sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in
her?
all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration, even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed.
Kamala just said the border's always been broken, but it was secure for 3 years when Laken Riley was murdered. That doesn't make any sense. How did Trump break the border that you said was secure? You can't follow Kamala's logic because there is none. She doesn't know anything about the border. She doesn't care about the border. She just doesn't want anyone talking about it. Her whole interview was a continuation of a cover-up. Watch.
Madam Vice President, you call Donald Trump.
The significance
you
of that.
call Donald Trump. He's misguided. You say now
He's
he
unstable.
is unstable.
He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And
but
Donald Trump
But
is,
you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump.
So Kamala Harris didn't want to talk about Kamala Harris, and she definitely didn't want to talk about Joe Biden. She never once touted the accomplishments of the Biden administration, not a single one. She just wants to prosecute Donald Trump. But America doesn't want a prosecutor. We want a president. At one point, she just snapped.
This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
Why didn't we see anger like that about the border, about prices, about crime? Never kind of showed that flash of anger when it was affecting millions of Americans. She wasn't likable. She wasn't charming. She was never funny. She wasn't warm. There was nothing gracious, eloquent, or reassuring about this performance. Then Brett asked her the question that she's had a week, actually the whole campaign, to think about. Watch this.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C.
Okay, she spent 8 years in Washington, D.C. That's twice as long as Trump. And what would you do differently? She said she'd bring fresh new ideas. Then she never said what the ideas were.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years. So what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
that is
tell
about
pollsters,
turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam Vice President.
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people have become. But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous.
So turning the page isn't turning the page from Biden. She's going to do everything the same. She's just turning the page from Trump, who wasn't in office. Her slogans don't even make sense because 79% of the country wants to turn the page from her. This is what an actual Kamala Harris interview should look like. Brett gave her the same treatment as he gave Trump in the spring. Respectful, firm, and persistent. We didn't swap her answers to make her look better like CBS. We didn't invite little Timmy along to hold her hand like CNN. This was a big girl interview. And she flopped.
And welcome to Hannity. And, well, desperate times, they call for desperate measures at the Harris campaign. Only hours ago, Kamala Harris sat down for a very tough live-to-tape interview right here on the Fox News channel with our very own Bret Baier. Coming up, Bret Baier will join us with an exclusive recap of that interview. Now, unlike the pro-Kamala state-run fake news media and other people that call themselves journalists, he asked tough, fair questions. He insisted on real answers in a short period of time, a short window that they gave him about very important topics. He didn't let Kamala off the hook. He pressed her. He pressed her repeatedly. Needless to say, I'd say the joy is gone in the Harris campaign tonight. And her obvious anger, that was on full display, the one she's notorious for. That was on full display during the interview. Kamala appeared agitated. Obsessively tried to simply avoid answering basic fundamental questions. She took zero responsibility for anything that has happened during the Harris-Biden administration. And when all else would fail, she'd either flat out lie or go to the default campaign mode. If the dog bites, if the bee stings, if you're feeling sad, just blame Donald Trump for everything, even the border crisis that she and Joe Biden caused. Take a look.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system.
When you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
Well, here's the truth, and let us not have revisionist history, shall we? Because on day one, simply with the stroke of a pen, not an act of Congress, the Harris-Biden White House, they reversed all of Donald Trump's border protections with executive orders, and then they bragged about it. And they lied about the border being secure for 3 years. But take a look at this.
So we have rescinded so many Trump immigration policies, it would take so much time to list them. We rescinded the Remain in Mexico policy. We rescinded, of course, the public charge rule that deprived vulnerable migrants from accessing certain critical life benefits. We have restored the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, the DACA program. We have rescinded so many and have restored so many that he really dismantled.
That's what they did on day one, and she didn't answer Brett Baer's question on how many illegal immigrants, unvetted, did they allow into the country. Well, the answer is over 12 million unvetted Harris-Biden illegal immigrants allowed inside of our country, all with the stroke of a pen. Many were violent criminals who committed heinous acts, as Brett pointed out, against American citizens. Dozens of Americans dead. Dozens have been raped, including children. Hundreds of others victims of violent crime. The cost through the roof. 3 young women that were mentioned during the interview: Rachel Nungary, Laken Riley, Rachel Morin, mother of 5, allegedly murdered by these suspected illegal aliens. Others, again, murdered, raped, victims of violent crime because of their failure to secure the border. And, of course, they rescinded every Trump policy. But don't expect an apology to the families of these victims from Kamala Harris. Take a look.
Jocelyn Nungary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border.
So do you owe them an apology, is what I'm saying?
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss, sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
No apology, and the bill she's referring to would allow almost 2 million illegal immigrants into the country and amnesty. And a lot of people opposed it, and they had control of both houses of Congress. As Brett pointed out, even Bill Clinton, while campaigning for Kamala Harris, admitted Laken Riley would be alive today if her killer had been properly vetted by the Harris-Biden administration, is what he said.
You had a case in Georgia not very long ago, didn't you? They made an ad about a young woman who'd been killed by an immigrant. Yeah, well, if they'd all been properly vetted, that probably wouldn't have happened.
Unfortunately, the border czar, Kamala Harris, takes zero responsibility for the border crisis, and she also doesn't seem to remember calling the border secure, something she repeated along with everyone else in the administration for 3 long years, or calling for illegal immigration to be decriminalized. Take a look.
You said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration, even before. Let's all be honest about that.
When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So decriminalizing border crossings, like you said in 2019.
I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as Vice President. I will not do that as President.
So these are evolutions that you've had.
Not a matter of following the law. You stated you wanted to change the law. You want to be president. Since Kamala's trying to duck, dodge, and weave the question and blame Trump and avoid scrutiny, let's take a look at what really happened. You decide. Take a look.
Would you call the border secure?
I think that there is no question that we have to do what the President and I asked Congress to do. Is the first request we made. Pass a bill to create a pathway to citizenship. The border is secure. We have to have a secure border, but I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct. That is correct.
You support giving universal health care, Medicare for all, to people who are in this country illegally?
Let me just be very clear about this. I am opposed to any policy that would deny in our country any human being from access to public safety, public education, or public health, period.
Now, Kamala supported taxpayer-funded sex change operations for not only convicts, but illegal immigrants in jail and other inmates. But when Bret Baier asked about this, bizarre position that I don't think any American can support, can you guess what she did? Blame Donald Trump, the guy that built the wall, implemented the stay in Mexico policies, and had the lowest illegal immigration in modern history. Never supported taxpayer-funded sex change operations for illegal immigrants, but you got to give her an A for effort. Take a look.
Are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what, you got to take responsible for what happened in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in black and white.
Would you still?
Wow, she's just flat out lying. In fact, the very first taxpayer-funded sex change surgery on a convicted felon was carried out in 2022. Yeah, thanks to the Harris-Biden administration. Think about that. Under Kamala Harris, your hard-earned tax dollars being spent on costly breast augmentation and other gender-altering surgeries to convicted murderers, other felons in prison, and she wants it for illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, barely getting by amid historic levels of inflation. Last month, 3.3%, inflation up year over year. In his interview, Bret featured this statistic showing a whopping 79% of you The American people believe this country is on the wrong track after nearly 4 years under Harris and Biden. According to Kamala, that's actually Donald Trump's fault, too. Can't make it up.
More than 70% of people
exhausted.
tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever of
become.
power.
You're vice president for 3.5 years. What is she talking about? No wonder she showed up late. They gave Brett very limited time. Kamala Harris is clearly in a state of denial, living in an alternate universe, if you will, where everything bad that ever happened in her administration is the fault of Donald Trump. She wants to believe that because Donald Trump just breathes air and exists, that things started just happening under her watch. Now, 2 new wars we have going on. War in Europe, war in the Middle East, a historic border crisis. It is real. A disaster and deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan. She was the last person in the room. Record-setting inflation that only recently she acknowledges and pledges she will deal with on day one, which was January 20th, 2021. And back-breaking gas prices, massive disruptions in our supply chain, and I can go on all night. It was clear from day one Joe Biden was not up to the job, not mentally, not cognitively, physically, and Kamala was more than happy to look the other way and, frankly, flat-out lied to all of us. Take a look at this answer.
And we give thanks to our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, the extraordinary President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Ho, ho, ho! Happy Independence Day!
Come on! I need to see some black folk on the grass. It's Juneteenth. Let me see some people on the grass.
I'm not being facetious. Well, President Harris led this effort to make things better.
And a pound of Ukrainian people, the proud, proud people, pound for pound, ready to fight with every inch of energy they have.
If Kamala will lie for 3 years about the cognitive abilities of the president of our country, the president of the United States of America, you know, what won't she lie about?
Today in Georgia, Donald Trump sat down for a town hall with an all-female audience. They would have asked me to appear, but they didn't want everyone fainting. Of course, Kamala also wanted to do a town hall with just women, but her staff couldn't define one. After banning pub crawls due to public complaints, people are accusing Prague of becoming a nanny state. Did someone say nanny? Asks one man. According to a newly revised FBI stats, violent crime in America has actually gone up, not down, as Democrats claim. Kamala Harris is now promising that if elected, she will ban math. Reports say Donald Trump may work at a McDonald's during a campaign stop in PA. Meanwhile, Kamala will also spend a day at a job she's never worked, vice president. Thank you. According to a report from the Public Interest Legal Foundation, hundreds of Arizona voters allegedly registered to vote using strip clubs, abortion clinics, and high schools as home addresses. Or as Hunter calls it, great places to meet babes. According to a new documentary, Christopher Columbus may have been Jewish. Yeah, instead of searching for a new route to the Far East, he was only looking for a restaurant that's open on Christmas. And finally, a Disney World cake shop is under fire for having prices that start at $22 per slice. You mean I have to spend $220 for dinner? Asks one man. All right. Why not? He loves it. All right. So Border Patrol agents are vowing that they're going to leave in droves if Kamala wins in November. This follows the earlier endorsement of Donald Trump by the Border Patrol Union. Strange. You'd think the person labeled the border czar would have had this endorsement all sewn up. She should have been a shoo-in, like me for best abs at the Teen Choice Awards. I got robbed. Truth is, all these Border Patrol officers fleeing their jobs will be joining a herd of others fleeing their life's work because they know the Dems don't want them doing it. It's mostly men fleeing traditional male jobs, cops, firemen, teamsters, jobs that often involve serious physical labor or upper body strength. You know, I never realized it before, but upper body strength is kind of sexist. I guess God was a misogynist. Wow, that didn't work. Bottom line, those who go into professions like these do it for the mission, not the money. There's not a buttload of Border Patrol whose other car is a Lamborghini. And if you take that mission away by denigrating the work they do, you can expect a rush for the exits that you usually see at a Jets game by the third quarter. And the Dems are wondering why they're doing poorly with men. Well, you can try not labeling their central purpose as evil, maybe less redefining and more respecting. Stop saying they're whipping people when it's just Larry Kudlow. Now, what if the teachers or nurses unions made a similar statement that if Trump were elected, they would walk off the job? Can you imagine the level of media hand-wringing, screeching about Trump not valuing the work of these heroes? And yes, I know there are male nurses and teachers. They're always hitting on me. And there are female cops and firefighters, too. Although I would prefer it's a man who carries me out of my burning apartment, preferably Ryan Gosling. But whatever your gender is, I respect you for doing these jobs. I don't want to do them, that's for sure. You think I want to run up a flight of stairs into a burning building to grab my bodybuilding trophies? That's what personal assistants are for, and I'm going to wait in the limo. Thank you very much. But we need these jobs, and the Dems need to stop villainizing them. How demoralized does the Border Patrol feel? Well, according to the Washington Examiner, they've lost more than 4,000 personnel since 2020. That's almost 20% of their workforce. Meanwhile, police departments nationwide cannot recruit or retain their headcount. It's the hidden version of defunding. Tens of thousands of cops' salaries have been saved because they never took the job to begin with. They made it a job Americans truly don't want to do, like working for Kamala Harris. She's lost more employees than the Titanic. Wow. Frankly, it's a miracle any cop still shows up for work. AOC must be skipping down Broadway, with her bodyguards, of course. Thanks to no cash bail and other criminal coddling reforms, arrested perps are back on the street before you can say, hey, where the is my wallet? But imagine that whatever you do for a living is every day undone before your day is over. I think my writers can relate to that. But what would that do to your morale? How must it feel to stand out on the southern border under the baking sun, trying to guard the nation from illegal entrants, only to be told that you're the problem? Remember this gem from Kamala?
Listen, I think there's no question that we've got to critically re-examine ICE and its role and the way that it is being administered and the work it is doing. And we need to probably think about starting from scratch because there's a lot that is wrong with the way that it's conducting itself, and we need to deal with that.
Now, to be fair, she is a moron. But, I feel dirty, and I should. But the entire agency charged with handling cartels and other migrant criminals is, in Kamala world, what's really illegal. Maybe that's why Customs and Border Patrol had 15 suicides in 2022 alone, forcing them to hire their first suicidologist. I think The View had to hire one for all of those men working their cameras. But that's what happens when the mission loses its value. When you're not only told that the work you believed in is evil, but that you've been the bad guy all along. And yes, generally, that means guy, you know, as in those evil monsters with the Y chromosome lumbering around among us. So the Dems and the media can try to redefine masculinity all they want. They could pay actors to play real men for Kamala all day long. But it's failing, because no matter who wins next month, the real truth is real men and real women know how much we need Border Patrol officers and men like them. The truth is we can't do without them, unlike Kamala.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.